What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue with our 2021 schedule preview projected record series. Florida State is up next, and if you're a Florida State fan, you've got to subscribe to our Florida State channel. You should see it pop up here on your screen. If not, just go to sg1sports.com/channels. You'll see all the channels that we have there, and just click on Florida State, go subscribe, and you'll get all kinds of Florida State videos. Florida State had a pretty tough schedule in 2021 when you look back at it. And they did avoid playing Clemson, and that was, I mean, they were on the schedule, but they didn't play the game. So, you could say whatever about that. But they had to play the other teams in the ACC that they had to play: Notre Dame, North Carolina, and Miami. So you're playing the second, third, and fourth best team in the conference. Of course, no divisions last year. And then if you want to throw NC State in there, at number 5, really, you could say they played the number 2, 3, 4, and 5 team in the ACC. And if they would have had to play Clemson, if that game had not gotten canceled, just think about how tough this schedule would have been. So 3-6 seems pretty rough. But again, when you look back at that schedule, I don't think it was as bad as maybe you might think. Of course, they did beat North Carolina, and that was a big win for this Florida State team. But we're going to look ahead here to 2021. Again, 3-6 last year. This is the schedule for 2021. Before we go game by game, let's just look at the games outside of the division. They'll be back to a normal schedule this year, of course, playing all the teams in your division. So you know you're going to play those games. But in the non-conference, they'll play Notre Dame, Jacksonville State, UMass, and Florida. Of course, Jacksonville State, UMass, that's not very tough. But playing two pretty good Power 5 teams, two top 25 Power 5 teams in Notre Dame and Florida, make for a very tough non-conference schedule. Notre Dame and Florida both figure to be top 10, 15-ish teams this year, I think. Florida on the road obviously going to be tough. And then in the non-division in the ACC, they get them again. North Carolina and Miami, brutal schedule in the ACC. Of course, they'll play Clemson in the division, and then also now playing North Carolina and Miami, the two teams you want to avoid out of the Coastal Division. Of course, they're going to play Miami every year. But again, North Carolina, the team that you really don't want to play out of that division. Very tough schedule for Florida State. When we go game by game, they start off with Notre Dame on September the 5th. Now, that's going to be a Sunday night game. That is scheduled for Sunday of opening weekend, or of week 1. Of course, we have week 0 before that. But that's going to be a big game. You know, Florida State coming in here week 1. A lot of new faces on this Notre Dame team. You got to think Florida State's going to come in thinking that they have a shot at pulling off this upset. It'll be a pretty big upset, but don't count them out. That could be a pretty exciting game. Then they'll get Jacksonville State after that, September 11th. September 18th, they'll go on the road to face Wake Forest, another team that they did not play last year because the game was canceled. You know, you go back to the schedule for Florida State last season. The last 5 weeks of the season, they only played 1 game. They had a bye week in there, then they had 3 games that got canceled. Wake Forest was supposed to be their final game of the season, but of course with COVID and everything, it was a crazy year. But they will get to play, hopefully, Wake Forest this year. And then they'll play Louisville on September 25th. That game will be at home for Florida State. That was probably their worst performance last season. So, you know, I would expect them to bounce back this year and see if they can get that win at home. We continue on now. After that, it's North Carolina, or actually Syracuse before that, on October the 2nd, playing them at home. You like Florida State's chances in that game. North Carolina, though, after that on the road, October the 9th. That's going to be a very tough game. But North Carolina coming into this year looking like potentially a top 10 team. You got to go on the road. I know they beat them last year, but I'm going to still go ahead and say that was a little bit of a fluke. That was probably Florida State's, I'd say it was their best game of the year. We'll see if they can do it again this year. UMass after that. Actually, before UMass, they get a bye week. So their bye week will be October the 16th. Really a horrible time for the bye week. Before playing UMass, I mean, I guess the one positive you could say from that is it's after the North Carolina game, so if they're a little beat up from that game, and if you don't have to fully prepare for UMass, because that should be an easy win, you could kind of look at it as having 2 extra weeks to prepare for Clemson. So we'll see if that turns into something. Maybe Florida State could shock the college football world and upset Clemson on October the 30th. That game will be on the road, though, and will be very tough, I think, for Florida State. NC State after that on November 6th. That'll be a home game for the Seminoles. Then Miami November 13th. Going to play them later in the year this year, which is interesting. And you look at those last 5 games, this is brutal. After Miami, they'll play Boston College on the road. We know Boston College is starting to look much better as a program. And then Florida on the road, rivalry game, November 27th. Of course, we're so glad to have that matchup back. And we'll see if Florida State can compete this year. But again, when I look at this schedule, the first half of the schedule there, yes, they have North Carolina. Yes, they have Notre Dame. Outside of those 2 games, though, there is a chance, I think, a good chance to win the other 5 games. So you could be sitting there at 5-2, getting ready to go down the stretch. But that stretch is a very difficult stretch. Again, Clemson on the road, NC State, Miami, on the road at Boston College, on the road at Florida. Just a brutal stretch there to close out the season. If Florida State wants to get to a bowl game this year, I think you really need to go 5-2 in those first games. Or maybe even shock Notre Dame and go 6-1. Probably not very likely, but you need to go 5-2 in those first games, and then you just got to knock off one of these teams coming down the stretch. Maybe an NC State at home, maybe Boston College, maybe even Miami. Who knows? But again, this schedule for Florida State for an ACC schedule is very tough. Playing Notre Dame and Florida in the non-conference and getting the 2 best teams out of the Coastal Division. This makes for, again, a very tough schedule for Florida State in 2021. All right, we have previewed the Florida State schedule for 2021. Now going to project what their record could be based on that schedule. And to be clear, this is not a prediction. Our official predictions won't come until the summer. This is simply a projection based off of this schedule and based off of their odds to win each game. Just a very conservative approach, grouping teams together in different groups, and again giving you just a projection. If they do better than this, it'll be a good season. If it's worse, I think it'll be a bad season. Kind of the middle ground for this team. And they were 3-6 last year. Here's the schedule, and this is the scale that we will use if the game is a 50-50 game where the spread will be 3 or 4 points, maybe less than that. It's going to stay in the white. Less than 10% in red, 10 to 25% in orange, 26 to 40% in yellow, 60 to 74% in purple, 75 to 90% in blue. If it's more than 90%, it will be in green, and that is where we will start. I think you've got a couple of games. You got Jacksonville State and UMass, 2 games that Florida State should win. They should have no issue at all winning those games. And again, it's kind of tough to do these projections even this early on because there's so much going on with the transfer portal and everything. And Florida State is a team that's really tough to figure out because they have so many transfers coming in. The guys that could be impact players. This team could make a huge jump next year, or this year I should say, but there is a lot of unknowns. So again, it's a conservative approach here, looking at last season, what the teams bring back, and things like that. So 2 easy wins, I think, for Florida State. And then you got one more game I think they'll be clearly favored in. That's Syracuse. Not a big favorite, 6, 7, 8 points, something like that in this matchup. But they're playing them at home. Syracuse is kind of down there at the bottom with Duke in the ACC right now. I know Florida State's not much above them, but I do think they are above them. And I'm going to say that this is not going to be an easy win. It's definitely a game Florida State could lose, but they'll be favored, I think, by about a touchdown. So now we go to the other side of this and look at the games where I think Florida State will be underdogs. We're going to start with the orange here, and there's Clemson. Clemson on the road, very tough game. I don't give them much of a chance to win that game. I think they'll be double-digit underdogs. And again, it would be a huge upset if they were able to beat Clemson. But that's really the only game I would say that they really don't have a chance in. There are, of course, many, many more very tough games here on the schedule, but that's going to be the one where, I think that they just don't have much of a chance. We'll go to the yellow now. And I think this is kind of the majority of the schedule, or not the majority, but the majority of groups here. Notre Dame, North Carolina, Miami, Boston College, Florida. These are games where I think Florida State will clearly be an underdog, but they won't be huge underdogs. They'll have a chance. It'll be an upset if they win, but they're going to have a chance, I think, in these games. Notre Dame is week 1, a big game there. North Carolina, they just beat last year, so they'll have some confidence. They'll have a shot. Again, I think it's going to be tough. Miami beat them pretty bad last year, but they're playing at home this year. You never know. Boston College, tough game on the road. And then Florida, rivalry game. So again, when you look at Florida State's schedule, I think the majority of this schedule is games that could really go either way, but most of them Florida State will be an underdog in. And then when we look at these other three games, Wake Forest, Louisville, NC State, these are to me 50-50 games. These are games that could go either way. Now, I would probably favor Florida State. Well, I don't know. They might be a slight underdog in all three of these games. It's very close. NC State, I think, would be the game where you're getting close to yellow range. You know, I think they're down there in the low 40s, but I think they have a shot playing that game at home. And again, with Florida State, we just don't know how good they're going to be. How much better will they be with all these new players, or will it make a difference? It's impossible to say. So that's why it's a very conservative approach here. But I think they will have enough talent to have a shot in these games, and they're close to 50-50 games. So again, with Florida State, you've got 2 wins, Jacksonville State and UMass. You've got probably a loss in Clemson. Not saying they have no chance, but it's very unlikely that they win that game. I think they've got a shot against Notre Dame, North Carolina, Miami, Boston College, and Florida. Maybe you pull off an upset there, maybe even 2 upsets. And then Syracuse, if you take care of business there, it's going to come down to these games. Wake Forest, Louisville, and NC State. These games in white. That's going to determine the season for Florida State, going to determine if their record is good or bad. And the way we do this is we count the green games here as wins. This orange game is going to be a loss. The Clemson game is going to be a loss. So then we average the rest of the games out. And the formula that I use, it's, again, just kind of a rough estimate here. The yellow games are counted as 40%, the white 50%, the purple as 60%. And then we just average those numbers out to give you the number of wins in those games. And for Florida State, when you apply this formula, the projected record for them is 6-6. So making it to a bowl game after a rough few years, I think it's not what Florida State fans really would like to see, but I think you would have to be somewhat happy with that. And again, if they beat Jacksonville State, Syracuse, UMass, and then they win all the 50-50 games, Wake Forest, Louisville, and NC State, they still would have to pull off an upset somewhere to do better than 6-6. And I mean, odds are they're not going to beat Wake Forest, Louisville, and NC State. You're probably going to drop one of those games. You're probably going to win one of these games in the yellow. And so that's why, again, when we average things out, the projection for them comes out to 6-6. So making it to a bowl game, not a great year, not a bad year. And that's just kind of the middle ground. If you do better than this, it's a good year. If you do worse than this, I think it's a bad year. And so they're right there in the middle again at 6-6. Do you agree or disagree? Do you think they'll do better or worse? Give me your thoughts down in the comments below.